The rabid Kremlin propaganda is trying to convince the whole world that Russia is a giant monster with unlimited resources, capable of waging war for decades as long as petrodollars keep flowing, and the orcs will never run out of shells.
Shoigu, Gerasimov, where are the munitions?
But these are just myths, fairy tales for the poor. More precisely, for poor Russians. There's simply no money. The Russian economy is a burning powder keg being doused with gasoline. And that's literal, because all the money from selling energy resources is being thrown by the Kremlin straight into the furnace of war.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, please, I implore you, take me to the war.
Everything earned through backbreaking labor is being poured into reviving mothballed Soviet equipment, assembling missiles, and paying the marauders and murderers who, for some reason, call themselves soldiers.
Maya, could you button up his pants, please? If I could on this round, come on! We're getting pressed! Don't expect us. What is it?
Of course, visually, it might seem to you that the Reich's economy is growing, but in that case, you should cross yourself.
First in Europe, we've overtaken the FRG.
What the hell are you talking about? Russia's economy has overtaken Germany so much that it crashed into itself. The rate of inflation growth in the pseudo-empire is outpacing even Medvedev's desire to drink.
Who are you? Who?
To stop the inflationary apocalypse, the central bank took a desperate step. It raised the key interest rate to 18%. What does this mean? It means that business in Russia is screwed.
Is that shadow from this? It's
The key interest rate is the minimum rate at which the Bank of Russia lends to commercial banks. Then commercial banks lend to companies and individuals themselves, but at their own higher interest rates. That is, loans for businesses and consumers are now over 20% per year. It's practically impossible to service such loans, so entrepreneurship in the swamps is dying and the purchasing power of the barefoot masses is falling.
What in the actual hell is going on?
For example, that same key interest rate in 2020 was only 4.5%. Just look at how Putin lifted Russia off its knees and threw it into a debt pit.
We are concerned that lending is growing at the expense of citizens who are already in debt. The share of borrowers with 3 or more loans in the consumer credit portfolio increased to 47% as of July 1st.
This growing pile of loans could at some point reach a tipping point when these loans, well, they're already not being repaid, but they might stop being repaid on such a massive scale that it could essentially destroy the entire financial system.
The only profitable business model left is to send your son or husband to fight in the war in Ukraine. And if the asset you send becomes inactive or an asset without arms or legs, then additional profit is expected.
We were very poor until I became a serviceman. He
immediately called and said, "Mom, I'm going to war." I didn't try to talk him out of it, I just cried. He said something in passing like, "Mom, I have to go anyway, because the loans need to be paid."
I thought I'll take the risk. If I'm lucky, I'm lucky. I was afraid I'd drown in debt.
Obviously, no matter what Kremlin experts and useful Kremlin idiots shout, Putin's so-called economic miracle on a war footing won't get very far.
But there's absolutely no available supply, which is precisely why, on the one hand, sometimes essential eggs completely disappear from the shelves, but on the other hand, there's significant inflation and steadily rising interest rates. But the economy itself, in general, is even going up.
And while some experts, including Western ones, are practically awarding Putin a Nobel Prize in economics, Kremlin officials themselves admit that a major collapse is approaching.
All this means that we have significantly deviated from the baseline scenario. Because of this, we have substantially revised our macroeconomic forecast. It now assumes a much tighter monetary policy in order to bring inflation back to target.
Putinomics is collapsing ahead of schedule in
strict accordance with the pre-approved plans.
Because Russia no longer has access to Western technologies and investments. And most importantly, Moscow is facing a catastrophic labor shortage.
And who exactly is going to do it?
So where have all the working hands in Russia gone?
Do the simple math, and you will see.
If you consider that each occupier has 2 hands, then about 1 million hands are now lying in Ukrainian soil. A few more million fled to avoid partial disposal.
Saying goodbye to loved ones and trying to leave Russia, mobilization is taking place across the country. The Kremlin calls it partial.
The remaining more or less skilled workers flocked en masse to military factories, which the Kremlin is showering with scraps of paper. The less qualified rush to dig trenches for 200,000 a month.
We're not stokers, we're not carpenters.
The rest of the economy's sectors have simply been left without people. There's no one to build, drive buses, or produce essential goods. The only hope is for Shoigu's combat robots, which no one has actually seen at the front.
It's not just experimental prototypes anymore. Mass production of combat robots has begun. These are robots that could really be shown in science fiction movies.
Perhaps they are all currently enrolled in vocational schools, diligently learning various trades. Putin, in his Kremlin, has overtaken Germany. On television, America and Europe are decaying, and nobody needs dollars anymore.
This is truly the end of the dollar's global monopoly.
But Russians don't notice this, because while enjoying life in the world's 5th largest economy, they're fighting over expired goods.
The Pyatrochka employee is pushing the container. There's already a whole delegation waiting for him there. 4 people already. Under-retired grandmother. Sausage!
The standard of living for ordinary Russians has sunk below the waterline of the cruiser Moskva. The incomes of the common folk keep falling, while prices for everything keep rising. In economics, this phenomenon is called Putin split.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, why are conscripts in the 83rd Brigade being fed worse than they're supposed to be?
You know, Sergey, I have indeed discussed this particular issue many times before.
Apparently, this is exactly the bipolar world that Piña I had in mind, when the needs of citizens are as far removed from their means as possible.
The entire country is consuming expired food products, ranging from various stores to bustling markets, and all the elderly pensioners frequently visit the market specifically for these particular products.
Pensioners go to the Tatum market in the Oil Depot district for expired products at low prices. Galina says, everyone knows perfectly well that they sell food here that isn't exactly fresh. Do you buy anything here yourself?
I do.
And
off the top of my head, because I'm a labor veteran and my pension is 14,600. Shame on our government.
Russians are fighting in stores for cheap products and are ready to strangle each other for free Barbary candies.
Lord, have mercy. People are going for the sugar. This is terrible. My God.
The crowd stormed the sales floor. People were shouting, pushing, and filling their carts with sugar. Because of the promotion, customers nearly got injured in the crush. The thing is, one of the grocery stores in Omsk decided to hold a sale and lowered the price by 3 rubles.
The serfs have been driven to the point where they steal food in broad daylight. In Yekaterinburg, the police and military enlistment officers carried out a raid on migrants who were selling fruits and vegetables. And when the stalls were left unattended, what did ordinary Russians start doing? Exactly!
Are you going to pay for the goods?
did you
buy from them? Does it produce any good? So, are you going to leave me the money now?
And it's not the homeless, drunks, or destitute pensioners stealing from the stalls, but ordinary, average Russians, the so-called middle class. For them, it's normal to grab whatever is left unattended, because there's no guarantee there will be anything to grab tomorrow. This is a special economic path.
They say, what is the regime built on? Oil and so on. Oil, of course, yes. But the real resource the scariest resource is the slavish. You get what I mean? That's the main resource. Because if they lived in the USSR without toilet paper and tampons, then they can keep living like that.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin's spin doctors keep telling the simpletons that sanctions aren't scary and the special military operation has only improved life in the swamps.
The special military operation has long had a very significant and profoundly positive impact on our daily domestic life and overall well-being.
But the hole in the Reich's budget is already 1 trillion rubles, and by the end of the year it will only get bigger, like Larisa Dolina's pupil after a successful apartment sale.
I became a victim of fraud. Very sophisticated and well-planned fraudulent actions were committed against me. A criminal case has been opened regarding this. I have been recognized as the victim and my apartment has been seized. It has been established that the fraudsters are located on the territory of Ukraine.
The Kremlin has nowhere to get money from. Oil and gas sales to Europe have collapsed. Gazprom, the breadwinner of all Muscovy, has become an unprofitable enterprise. In just the first half of 2024, Russia's main asset earned a negative 480 billion.
The value of Gazprom, the entire so-called PJ Sino, that's not a pathology department, that's just what it's called, a public joint stock company. So this PJSC Gazprom, for many months now, its total value, if you look at the shares, meaning its market capitalization, the price for which you could sell or buy Gazprom is much less than its debt.
China and India have also stabbed Russia in the back. No, they haven't refused to buy hydrocarbons, in fact, quite the opposite. They're happily sucking resources out of Moscow at extremely low prices. The Kremlin has nowhere else to turn, so it agrees to these exploitative terms.
No, seriously, that's awesome. But nice. You really are pulling it off. You know how to do it. You can do it.
But the most important and most painful thing for the Kremlin is that China and India refuse to pay Russia for resources in hard cash. India pays only in rupees, which can only be spent in India. How convenient!
Yes, that is indeed a problem because in the current situation, a huge amount of rupees has accumulated and so far they haven't found any use for them. And our Indian friends assured us that they would propose promising areas where these funds could be invested.
The Chinese brothers went even further and refused to accept any payments from Moscow at all. Due to sanctions, the largest Chinese banks no longer conduct transactions with Rusreich, not even in yuan. A new term has appeared: clean and dirty yuan. The dirty yuan is the one bought in the unwashed. As a result, Russia is forced to switch to barter with China, that is, direct exchange of goods. Very traditional in the spirit of primitive communal society. Now the Kremlin will be trading oil for Abibas sneakers and cheap smartphones. Prosperity in all its glory.
The guy was on his way to success. It didn't work out. No luck.
So, the outlook for Russians is looking rather bleak. Everything is heading toward the Kremlin starting to take money from Russian citizens to continue the war and maintain its own regime. There are practically no other sources left to finance their greatness. So, dear patriots, get ready for frozen savings, cuts to social programs, and new taxes.
So, the last remaining source, the final one, will be the population. At first, they'll take from them by cutting funding for all kinds of social needs. This means, first and foremost, education, healthcare, and culture. And then, it's possible they'll start taking money directly from the people.
For their unwillingness to take an interest in politics, Russians will pay dearly and consistently. And most importantly, in a forced but voluntary way, just like under Stalin. Just the way they like it.
In other words, the population will be encouraged to actively buy these bonds. This is an old practice, a Stalin-era practice bonds for the restoration of the national economy. The principle will be very simple. If you're a patriot of your homeland, then you must subscribe. And over the course of a year, buy bonds worth 1 month's salary. And if you don't want to subscribe, then apparently you don't support the policy of the party and the government, and you don't want to support our boys in the special military operation. And that makes you wonder whether you are the kind of person who should be working in our organization.
And of course, every Russian should remember that sooner or later they will have to pay reparations to Ukraine. And the longer the unprovoked aggression of their pseudo-state continues to persist, the more and the longer they will ultimately have to pay for their actions.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.